It's called a bogus pipeline because in the early days of social psychology, the guy that came up with this idea, it was actually what he did. And you have to change. People are gullible all the time. You have to move with the technology. So, and when they originally did this, they had this big tube. It was a big tube, and it was attached to the side of the head of the subject. And the experimenter told them that I can tell based on what I can see through this tube whether you're telling the truth or not. That's not true. I mean, they couldn't tell anything. But it was believable. So it's called a bogus pipeline because the tube was like a pipeline. They had this story about how the tube was conveying information through this pipeline so people wouldn't lie. One empirical example of the use of the bogus pipeline to get around social desirability and show you the challenge of trying to get a fair readout on people's attitudes and behaviors, if you want to connect them. John Sabini used a bogus pipeline technique to solve what was sort of a conundrum, a mystery in social psychological research on sexual activity. In lots of studies, experiment survey data on sexual behavior, there was a problem, which was that men always reported more lifetime heterosexual sexual experiences than women. Now, I know it's early in the morning, but let us reflect for a moment on why that can't make any sense. If you were able to survey every person in the world, and you ask them how many times they engaged in heterosexual sex, the numbers should be equal for males and females. Because that's who would have been involved. So those numbers, if everybody is telling the truth, they should be equal. But men report more lifetime heterosexual sexual experiences than women. Now, unless women die after they have sex immediately, thereby eliminating them from possibly filling out the survey, there's some problem with that, not some logical problem. And so people thought for a while, what was it? Were people defining sex differently? There were these theoretical articles where people said, well, some men have a very loose criteria about sex, like if somebody they have a crush on, talk to them and they say it's sex, and then maybe women subtract off people that they end up dating from the list as not having counted. So there was a lot of theoretical, who was lying, men were lying, women were lying. So John Sabini came up with an ingenious bogus pipeline idea for how he's going to get around this problem. He had subjects, male and female undergraduates, come to the lab, and he took a hair sample from each of them. And he told them that, and it turns out that he was really sort of foreshadowing technological development several decades later, but at the time, what he said was not true. And he said, I can tell, I'm going to take this hair sample, and we can, in our very high-tech laboratory here, we can derive from this very small sample of your hair a pretty good measure of the amount of testosterone in your system. And testosterone is pretty highly correlated in both men and women with lifetime sexual experience. Okay, so people believed it. Of course, they did clip the hair, but then they didn't do anything else with the hair. I saw John Sabini's lab, didn't have any fancy machines in it. There were no machines at all. They just threw away the hair. But subjects believed that because they were getting this hair sample, that the experimenter would know the truth. And so apparently, because as you'll see, the results changed, people changed their answers, because all of a sudden, this robust male-female differences in reported lifetime number of heterosexual sexual experiences, the male-female difference disappeared in the context of the bogus pipeline. Now, you're probably wondering, well, who was lying? Whose numbers changed? And as you might have guessed, everybody was lying. The numbers that males and females agreed upon for total lifetime heterosexual sexual experiences was in the middle, between lower than what males have been saying, without the bogus pipeline, higher than what females have been saying. And Sabini interpreted this in terms of social desirability. That for male college students, the socially desirable thing, how they want to appear to others, is to have lots of partners, to be very virile. And for women, they don't want other people to think that they're sluts, so they're motivated to present themselves. The socially desirable answer is to not have very many sexual partners. Now, that's interesting from a social psychological perspective. It's reasonable to think about those things, but if we want to study attitude-behavior links, we want to understand sources of behavior and behavioral intention, we have to actually get an honest read of behavior. So being able to come up with things like a bogus pipeline, in addition to just sort of giving social psychologists an opportunity to be creative and sometimes a little bit humorous, it is important for us to get accurate, or at least somewhat more truthful views of people's behavior. So that's more on the sort of measurement side, but there are two other factors that are important to take into account. The first is our identity. Sometimes we behave in a certain way because we define ourselves as somebody who does that sort of thing. And we'll see this more when we talk about persuasion after break. We can get people often to do what we want them to do by getting them to change their identity to be the kind of person that we want them to think of themselves as being. Because people have a tendency, when they have some identity, like let's say you decide, I'm really going to be an altruistic person. I am altruistic. That's my motto for this week. I'm altruistic. And so you're going to go out and do lots of altruistic things, even if you don't actually think that you don't even think that they're that particularly useful, and other people aren't pressuring you to do them. You don't have attitudes or norms, but you think I'm an altruistic person. This is the kind of thing that I do. So when we have a very strong identity component, we believe that we're the kind of person who does this, we may override attitudes and norms and engage in behaviors because we want to reinforce our view of ourselves. Finally, one thing that is discounted or left out of the theory of reasoned action and theory of planned behavior that can interfere both with our intentions as well as our behavior is past behavior. And there's an oft-quoted and sort of trite, but still true, saying that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And that is boring but true. We are strongly creatures of habit, and regardless of what we intend, our past behavior can override the best of intentions. You see this a lot in the context of substance abuse. If you watch Intervention or any of those other shows, or you have the opportunity to see, unfortunately, somebody in your own life struggling with substance abuse, you may see that people can formulate intentions, and they can have all those things in order, their attitudes, their norms, even their perceived behavior control, but you put them back in the context that they were in when they were using, and past behavior trumps everything else. They're being around the same people, being in the same place. Their habits trump their intentions. And so, yes, intentions are important, attitudes, norms, and perceived behavior control are important, but our identity is important, and our past behavior is a strong predictor of future behavior. It doesn't totally predict future behavior. There's still opportunity to change, but it is a strong predictor. Questions about those factors? So after break, we're going to talk about what has turned out to be the most famous research on attitudes, which is cognitive dissonance research. We'll talk about your attitude questionnaire assignment, and we're going to talk about persuasion. So have a relaxing